I thought I would jump on today to respond to the news story about Tony Blair's point of view on net zero. I'll go into some of the detail of what he said, what a professional working on decarbonisation thinks in response, and then maybe some thinking on the trajectory of emissions reduction in the UK and further afield. But first, some thoughts about hard things. I'm part of a running club here in Durham, and almost every week people from the club do incredible things. They do endurance challenges, they set new personal bests. Even completing Couch to 5K is an incredible achievement. Many of these achievements have meant weeks and months of training with focus, with really big efforts, with long-term commitment. For example, in June, I'm going to support one of our club in taking on the Bob Graham Round. And if you aren't part of a fell running community, you might not have heard of the Bob Graham Round, but it's a bit of an incredible challenge. 42 peaks around the Lake District, around 66 miles of running, and an elevation gain nearly the height of Everest. You join the Bob Graham Club if you complete the round in 24 hours. And this is one of the big challenges that many good runners attempt, or maybe dream of attempting one day. And to be honest, it's something that's got into my head, and I could dream at some point in the next few years that I could have a go. This is a hard challenge. In 2024, the Bob Graham Club suggests that there were 232 registered attempts, but only 107 successes. 54% of people trying last year didn't complete the round. And I guess to be clear, you don't try and do this if you aren't a really good runner. These people would have spent months, if not years, recceing the route. They're likely to be some of the best runners in their club. They attempted the round thinking that they could achieve it. You could say over half the people trying are doomed to fail, but there is a chance that they succeed, that they do something amazing, that they achieve this massive goal. They do something that not many people can claim to have achieved. But you know what, even better than that, in ticking off 30 summits in a day, that's a pretty incredible achievement. In running 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, even 60 miles, but not completing the round, that's a pretty incredible achievement. Being doomed to failure doesn't mean that trying it itself wasn't extraordinary in the first place. Okay, so do you hear what I'm saying about the headlines about Mr. Blair's new report? Just because reducing emissions enough to prevent catastrophic climate change is hard, doesn't mean that we shouldn't start. It doesn't mean making progress won't make life better or cheaper or air quality cleaner. Achieving net zero may be nearly impossible by a certain date, but getting 50% of the way there would mean reduced risk, lives saved, costs minimised. Getting 80% of the way there would be great, 90%, 95% extraordinary. And we should start the training and conditioning needed to at least attempt the challenge. Okay, metaphor over for now. What was actually behind the headline that in what Mr. Blair was saying, even if he was saying it fairly clumsily? Well, first, it's sometimes good to ignore the headlines and try and get into the detail. I've had a look at the foreword to this report, and in that, Mr. Blair says that any strategy based on either phasing out fossil fuels in the short term or limiting consumption is a strategy doomed to fail. That's not saying that net zero is doomed to fail. Our government's advisors have said in their 7th carbon budget that about 25% of our energy could come from oil and gas still in 2050. That's not short term. This is not a cliff edge. It's a medium term transition. And lots of people rightly call for the pace to increase, but government policy is for a transition, not a cliff edge. And at COP28, the world agreed to transition away from fossil fuels in the manner that's currently being planned. So when he is talking about net zero, he's not saying, as the headlines have suggested, that net zero in the sense of most countries and the way that they talk about it, and the meaning of that phrase, they're not saying that that's doomed to fail, but they're saying that a shorter term transition and a quick ban of fossil fuels would be doomed to fail. But he also goes on to say that none of this invalidates the inconvenient truth that the climate is changing to our detriment, or that this is one of the fundamental challenges of our time. He then goes on to say, nor does it mean we shouldn't continue to deploy renewable energy, which is both necessary and cost effective. So these headlines this week could have said, Tony Blair says that climate change is one of the fundamental challenges of our time and calls for continued deployment of necessary and cost-effective renewable energy. But it said net zero is doomed to fail. Tony Blair's not asking for the pace of transition to be slowed down, even if his communication on this has been a bit clunky. He's setting out that we need to continue investment in what we have and to look to more emerging technologies to help further down the line. I think that bit's actually a bit debatable, but I'm not too upset about it. In the forward, he mentions nuclear fusion, which, again, debatable. It always seems to be 10 years away. He mentions sustainable aviation fuel, which could be a very costly way to have a small impact on aviation emissions, but again, open to that debate. He mentions green steel, which is a technology that's possible. He mentions low emissions cement. Great. I'm not sure where we're up to with that. He then suggests that carbon capture should be at the centre of the battle, which is kind of government policy with the announcement last year of the £21 billion investment over the next couple of decades in Teesside and Merseyside industrial clusters. But again, that's kind of debatable on value for money. I did a video about it. He goes on to say that nuclear should be part of the solution, which again is already in government plans. He suggests that artificial intelligence could help, which I guess it is already, and could help more, maybe. He says that planning policy needs to change to help facilitate clean energy growth, which is probably true. He says we need more emphasis on how we finance climate action. Great, completely agree with that. He says adaptation must move up the agenda, which I agree with, but that doesn't mean surrendering to fossil fuel interests to keep things as they are, so we have to adapt. He then has some criticism of the COP process that I think many climate activists would sympathise with that criticism. So overall, at least the exec summary of this paper is basically repeating, it's not dissimilar to existing British climate policy. And that, could be a negative comment on government policy rather than a positive point to make. But anyway, what Tony Blair's comments aren't are a call to slow down on emissions reduction. They're asking for a new global process to scale global solutions. So what's happened here? I think this has probably been communicated clumsily by the Tony Blair Institute. It's been reported poorly by many media outlets, and it could be used in bad faith by those who want to slow down the transition. But also, its conclusions of continued investment, of financing emerging technologies, and of a global conversation on solutions are actually really welcome. This is not a call to stop the transition. So maybe back to my metaphor, this is Tony saying at the start of a 2-year Bob Graham round project, I'm going to do some recce's of this route, I'm going to do loads of them, but I'm also going to go to train in the Alps to improve my fitness before I attempt the real thing. Maybe I've pushed the metaphor a bit too far. But let's be clear, net zero is not doomed. Tony Blair didn't say it was, and most of what he says doesn't change the facts that we need to reduce as much emissions as quickly as possible in every way we can. Rant over.